Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with a life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.
Good evening, everyone. We are here directly from COP27. I'm Esteban Rodofili in for Roca Bujauri, as he couldn't join us tonight. How's everyone doing? Today we have Valholly Frank, we have Jeff Dismukes, and we have Michael Fidler here in Sharm El Sheikh, Egypt. How's everyone doing?
I'd love to say great, but in the press media center, it's freezing. It's freezing. The gentleman sitting next to me just said the same thing. I think he'll be wearing a hat right now.
I will say it again. I don't know how you survive the winters of the Czech Republic, really. But Jeff, how was your day today?
Had a good day. Learned a lot more, and that's what I'll talk about a little bit later. Is really the makeup of all the people attending this year and what that looks like.
Wonderful. And Valholly?
My day has been all right. I didn't actually go to the COP venue today, but I got through about 3 hours of a court hearing, so always productive.
Yes. So for today, we, as you may recall from yesterday, we had an interview after a panel on the 1.7 billion pledge to protect to fund indigenous communities that protect forests in the US pavilion. We had an interview after that with one of the indigenous activists and part of the panel and a senior policy analyst from USAID. As you may recall, the audio didn't go so well in that interview. It had considerable interference. So thanks to Michael, we have been able to at least improve the audio of this interview so you don't miss the content. What we'll do tonight is broadcast the prior interview with the member of the panel, and then the USAID interview, just to recap on what this particular case was. Michael, can we start the interview?
Yes, we can. I'm getting there right now.
Thank you.
Good afternoon. We are here with Hindu Ibrahim from Chad at the US Pavilion, who has just been a panelist at the fourth senior pledge of 1.7 billion. How do you do? Thanks for having us.
Sure, it's a pleasure. Well, thank you.
You just spoke at the panel, and we apologize for again asking about this, but would you mind telling our audience at Campus Climate Corps and the Water Keepers Associations about what has been going on with this 1.7 billion pledge? What amount of money has been already invested, and how that money has been distributed?
Sure. So, firstly, the climate change impact, it is a reality in our communities. It is not around the report. It is the real life that people are living every single day. Secondly, it was nice last year when they all come and announced 1.7 billion for indigenous peoples solutions. And at the end of the day, we come here in this COP, we realize that already 19% of this money is already invested. That means more than 300 millions. And then the sad thing is, it is only 7% of this money went to the indigenous peoples, around 17 millions. And our caution is, where is the 17 millions went? Because we do not know any indigenous organization who said that they received 1 million or whatever, because it's already like only 1 year. And at the end, the 93% went to the big NGOs, governments, local authorities. So it's not went to the indigenous peoples. They cannot tell us that the indigenous peoples are the solution makers and they commit the money on our names, and then the money ending up again to the big organizations. So this is not a direct access funding. For us, we work in 10 principles. Through them, we say the direct access funding might be the money that can go directly to our communities, to fund our initiatives, to our own organizations. And if there is need of the intermediary organization, we can choose who are the intermediary organization that we want to work with them, but not imposing one. And also the money cannot tackle one ecosystem. It can tackle all the ecosystem together. We cannot only choose the forest and left the savannas. We cannot choose the savannas, left the glaciers or the mountain. So we need to tackle all the ecosystems together.
Has it been a pattern that you have seen recurrent among initiatives of this type? Has this pattern been repeated in initiatives of this type in the past?
Most of the initiatives are tackling only one ecosystem. And let us be honest, we are all aware that it is important to protect a tropical forest. But the most important is end all the commodities around the tropical forest. It is very simple. Don't say that we are going to invest money to protect it if you do not caring about the existing primary forest in the tropical forest, in Amazon, in Congo Basin, in Indonesia, in all the places. If you stop all the deforestations, I think you can protect it more. Then invest on the glaciers protections. Invest in the savannas in order to keep people there to do not go and invade the ecosystem of the tropical forest. Invest in the oases and people can stay there. They cannot just come to the savannas. And invest on the indigenous peoples directly. So don't repeat the same thing who never worked for more than 30 years.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having us.
You're welcome.
Good afternoon. We're here with Lauren Baker, Senior Policy Analyst for USAID. Thanks for coming. How are you doing?
Doing very well, thank you.
Can you give our audience a little bit of the context of the 1.7 billion fund to protect forests?
Sure, yes. So last year at COP26, 23 donors now. There have been some additional donors, but over 20 donors came together, both bilateral and philanthropic, to make this pledge to $1.2 billion to support indigenous peoples and local communities 10 years. Some of these funds are for various aspects of capacity building, tenure reform, supporting indigenous rights, the lands and territories. So it's a mix of already allocated funds, those that are already aligned, as well as an intention to grow and accelerate those support, including for direct funding to indigenous groups.
Thank you for that. So it has been argued in the recent panel that of the 19% that has already been disbursed, 7% has reached the actual indigenous community, but the rest has not. Can you give us some insight on the mechanism through which this actually occurs? How these funds are disbursed and allocated?
Sure. Yeah, so it is true that that in the first year report, they were able to identify the types of organizations for which these funds were allocated. And yes, 7% went directly to Indigenous organizations, which there were a lot of concerns about, of course, in the panel. I think one thing to recognize is that those other funds, especially ones going to trusted intermediaries, often do make their way as well to Indigenous organizations, to Indigenous communities. And so I think the percentages, you know, are an indicator of sorts, but it's not strictly reflective of the amount that is making it to Indigenous communities, to Indigenous organizations, especially when you consider some of these aspects like capacity strengthening for rights. Sometimes there is a role for trusted third-party organizations, for intermediaries. And so we do see that value, recognizing that for at least bilateral donors, for USAID and others, the administrative bins are admittedly high. There are things, requirements that we have related to being trusted, you know, trusted sources for U.S. taxpayer dollars, where we do need to be highly attentive to those. And so I think there are, in reality, times in which having these intermediate organizations, granting organizations can play an important role in enabling access to Indigenous representative organizations, even if it's not current. But I understand their concerns, their valid concerns. We're trying to do more, but there is also, you know, these challenges related to our bureaucracy that do exist, that will continue to exist. And so we do want to recognize that there are times and places where those third-party organizations can't play with them.
Is there perhaps a timeline, or can you give us some detail on the mechanism through which still some of that lingering percent, right, like the 93%, can reach to Indigenous communities?
Right. So it's hard to speak as a block for the first 10-year funders group, because there are 23 different donors, some of which, like Christensen Fund, for example, have 100% of their focus on Indigenous people's issues and organizations. Maybe not 100% of direct funding, but certainly, you know, are able as a private foundation to have different mechanisms that might enable that in a way that's a little bit different for some of the bigger bilateral donors, like the U.S., like Germany, and others. But in terms of USAID, which is the organization that I work with, there are certainly big efforts underway, as we talked about, the 25% target for programmatic funds to go to local organizations by 2025. So there's a ramping up that's happening already. There's that 50% target by the end of the decade for local leadership, for the co-creation, co-investment, and so on. And certainly through our own programs, we were highlighting some of the other representatives or leadership from the FSC Indigenous Foundation. We have a global development alliance with FSC to have the Indigenous Peoples Alliance for Rights and Development. That's an example, a really great example, where they're working directly with an Indigenous-led organization, the FSC Indigenous Foundation, in order to then work directly with other Indigenous federations, including the regional ones that were there, Valholly, with the Global Alliance for Territorial Communities and others. And so I think those types of examples are there. They're growing. We're looking forward to ramping up even further, both as an organization and as the first 10-year funders group, in order to continue to expand these efforts for partnerships, meaningful partnerships, direct funding as well.
The intermediaries, are they generally NGOs, or can you give us some precision on the intermediaries?
To provide like community direct, there's so many, it's so varied, you know? So like one of the examples I highlighted today was the Amazon Indigenous Rights and Resources Initiative. That's one where we do have intermediaries that are like US-based NGOs, but it's also a means to get direct partnerships and funding for COICA, the regional Indigenous Federation in the Amazon. Direct funding to, it sounds like direct, but it's like through the intermediary, getting funding and partnerships with Indigenous federations in Colombia, in Brazil, in Peru, in Guyana. So I think those types of examples are ones that they would be concerned with because there is the role of an intermediary, and yet we're doing great work in partnerships with indigenous federations in so many countries, and I think that work is really valuable and reflects a lot of these other principles like co-creation, like these kind of hand-in-hand partnerships that advance indigenous rights while also benefiting society.
One final point. So, as you mentioned before, there are bureaucratic requirements, and those requirements are actually legal. From a policy standpoint, would it be possible to reimagine a new legal framework from developed countries to actually provide a more diverse route to funding indigenous communities, and what do you envision would it take?
Right. Yes. So there are these requirements, of course, with U.S. taxpayer dollars. There are certain aspects that we can reimagine, as you say. There's certain aspects that are a little more stringent. But I think, there's been a big push in recent years for more new partnerships, new partnership initiatives. We have a lot of programming through local works. We have programs, a range of different examples of new mechanisms for annual program statements, for other things like that lower the barriers and increase access to kind of lighter lift ways of partnering with USAID. And so we're trying to do those steps as we can find them. It's not across the board, but there's really great momentum in a positive way that are still within the legal parameters, but also enable people to submit, several 2-page concept notes, for example, instead of big, 100-page solicitation responses and things like that. So there are, definitely steps that exist that we've been taking, and I look forward to leading it forward.
Thank you so much for having us.
I appreciate it. Thank you.
Well, quite an interesting case. As I said before, it's probably befitting the realm of political ecology as a case study. But overall, yes, it's quite challenging to have a direct road of funds, direct nexus for funds to indigenous communities, given the extensive requirements that are necessary to actually direct those funds there, the considerable amount of paperwork that has to be done, and therefore, in this case, the majority of the funds have actually had to be used for intermediaries. My last question with her had to do with essentially the possibility of reimagining a legal framework for financial aid to be directed more efficiently to these organizations, but which is probably something that would require extensive work, study, and modifications. But any insights on this? Any thoughts on this particular aspect?
I think one interesting, I went to a panel of natives from the Amazon, and they were discussing this exact pledge and these exact statistics. And aside from, of course, wanting direct funding with no intermediaries, one request they had was at least they get to decide who the intermediaries are. And I think that would be one thing that would at least resolve some of the issues in the entire process, and it would allow for a little bit more transparency. And as straightforward of an ask it is, a lot of these people are just asking for transparency when it comes to these topics, when it comes to these pledges. And that's something I wish we could see. And like you said, it is incredibly difficult to get this funding directly to communities, and it takes time and paperwork, and it's a whole big long process. But that's definitely something that seems reasonable, is transparency and just knowing who all of these people are and not being left in the dark.
Thanks for that. Given the time, we'll have to move to another material. Jeff Dismukes has been essentially taking a look at the demographics of COP and asking people about their particular background, their age, and essentially to acquire an impression of who is attending COP nowadays. Jeff, you can take it away.
Yeah, what I really was trying to do was I continued to prove or try to prove or disprove Greta Thunberg's perspective that this whole event, it has become nothing but a greenwashing event. So one of the things I wanted to do was look at who's attending and what their expectations are, why they're attending, what their backgrounds are, and then also kind of get a general idea of demographics. So to start off with, I just want everybody to understand what COP is, what it stands for. It's a conference of parties, and these are the parties to the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which are, state actors. And so the COP is not open to the public. What it basically has three segments of participation, and that is the parties themselves and their representatives, which make up more than 50% of the participants. And then the second largest group is the group like us, the observer groups, which are observers from non-governmental organizations. And those represent about a little more than a third of the participation. So we have half the participants being state governments and their representatives, and then a third of the participants being people like us, NGO observers, and then the rest being a sparse representation from each of categories like intergovernmental observers, UN organizations, and other UN affiliated participants. So my objective today was kind of just randomly stopping people and finding out who they were, why they're here, how long they've been here, and what they're here for and what their background is. Surprisingly to me, and I guess this kind of plays out in the statistics a little bit, but the vast majority of people that I stopped were actually representatives of the parties, and they seem to make up the largest group of people that were passed me by, because we can tell by the color of badges. Observers like ourselves have yellow badges. The representative of the parties have pink badges. The UN people have blue badges, and the press have orange badges. And I almost forgot about the press, and sorry about that, Michal. But anyway, I didn't stop any press people because I know what they're here for. And so most of the people I stopped were representatives of the parties, and you would think these would be like, officials from the country and stuff, but actually what they are primarily are people from the countries that the countries bring to highlight what the countries are doing to fulfill the objective of the convention, which the objective of the convention is to limit greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere to the point where the atmosphere does not produce dangerous effects on the climate. So what it turns out that they bring mostly are representatives from industry and technology. And that's why the pavilions are mostly highlighting talks from industry, technology, innovators, talking about what they're doing and everything like that. So naturally, that does leave open a lot of space for greenwashing. I mean, you have OPEC here, for instance, and a lot of the oil industry talking about the innovations that they can do and this, the part that they have to play in all of this. And obviously, a lot of that is greenwashed. But the other thing is that you also have a lot of startups, and these are really entrepreneurial innovators that are primarily here to network and basically get their companies and their innovative technology off the ground commercially. And so in a lot of ways, that's not really greenwashing, and that hopefully can end up being at least as much of a solution or more of a solution than what we're getting out of the actual framework documents and what the countries are able to agree on. Because as a lot of you may know, we haven't even gotten an agreement signed out of this year's COP, and the countries are still debating on what they will commit to. A lot of countries are trying to backtrack on their commitments and things like that. So it may be that our best hope actually is with these entrepreneurial innovators, and that's why they're here. They're here to meet and network with other innovators and other companies for funding, for market share, to grow these innovations. And so the vast majority of the people that I talked to were in the red badge, the party representatives, and they were entrepreneurial innovators. So the other thing I noticed when I realized that a lot of these random people I was selecting were these people, I started trying to look for more of the observers. And one thing I saw was a lot of the observers typically were grouped up in groups that they came with, and so therefore they were a little bit harder to approach, and they all just seemed to be having a good time amongst themselves in their groups. And so as bad as the greenwashing aspect is, that's another real problem with these events, is that a lot of the observer organizations are coming here just as a fun time and a place to party. I heard groups of observers like singing "Row, row, row your boat" and things like that. So I was like, okay, what does that have to do with it? But they were having a good time. But what it's designed for is observer groups like ourselves are supposed to have input into these negotiations that the countries are going through, and there's a comment process, an input process. So I don't know how much of that is going on, and I hope a lot more than what appeared was going on when I was looking at observers. The other thing that I noticed was the age demographics are heavily shifted to the younger side, which I think is a good thing. The people that I talked to, I had 2 people over the age of 50 and 1 person in her 20s, but the vast majority of the people that I talked to were in their 30s and 40s. And so again, these are the people that are really out there hustling, trying to come up with creative solutions, and they're entrepreneurs. So they're here to network and generate, funding and money for their projects. Most of the people also that I talked to had not been here the full 2 weeks. It seems like there's a tendency for people to come 1 week at a time. Most of the people that I talked to were here for just this week, and they were not here for last week, though they had colleagues here for last week. So it seems to be divided between the 2 weeks. And they are here with, like I said, yesterday, it's more like a trade show because they are definitely here with the idea to pitch their products to the market and to network with other people who have these products. And you know, in a lot of ways, that's probably our biggest hope, is that some of these private sector innovators can come up with solutions that will help change things, because the governments themselves don't seem to be doing a whole lot in that area.
Wonderful. Thank you, Jeff, for that analysis. Yes, and I've been indeed told that essentially what I see this year in terms of a younger shift in demographics has not always been like that. This is my first COP, but Michael, can you give us some? You have been, Michael and Valholly, you have been doing this before. So can you give us some insights of how big the shift is in terms of age?
Well, this is my, I believe, third COP. And I wouldn't say that there is much of a difference when it comes to the age structure of the participants. I have observed something very similar both in Glasgow and in Madrid. So for me, it's nothing new in this sense.
Valholly?
I'd have to agree with Michael, but I think I'm just really impressed by how many people are speaking out, especially considering the lack of like protesting. And Jeff was telling me earlier that he was seeing quite a few protests, nothing of big size, not too many people doing it, but there were some at least. And based on that, the fact that I'm hearing a lot of youth voices still is really cool. And of course, this is the first year where there's the Youth and Children's Pavilion. So that's a step.
Yes, and I believe that it would be good to in the future conduct actual surveys of and have demographic surveys to see essentially how, if there is a shift and how big it is, and how does it impact the different categories of attendance to COP, whether it is observers, press, or actual delegates. But it would be very interesting to see a comprehensive analysis of the demographics. So having said that, Michael, I believe we have some photographs from you today.
Of course, I have a set of photos like every night. So let me share my screen so I can show you what I caught today. Here would be the first image of the day. That's a small protest which took place right after entering to COP. That's one of the few places where the protesters are allowed to actually deliver their protest. This is the image that should show the size of the crowd, of the protesters. So it's the usual number, very low number. I would say something around 20 people just protesting, and maybe 50 to 100 people are watching the protesters. The slogans were today mostly about climate justice, also about gender justice, and delaying the justice. I try to take few images of the faces of the people, and the message I took with me was that the protesters call this COP, it was supposed to be called Loss and Damage COP, but now it just became another Lost and Damaged COP. So that's a pretty nice slogan. I think it will resonate. We will hear that more often. And another feeling I had from COP today was that it felt like it's coming slowly to its end. Maybe half of the people on the bus had their luggage with them already. Some people, or many people, are walking within the COP venue with their luggage as well. People seem to be getting tired after being 2 weeks in Egypt, or maybe some of us are even longer here already. So I was not really searching for people taking breaks, but there were many of them today taking at least short naps. So it's tiring to be here for such a long time. Some of the pavilions were already or started to be cleaned. It's not the evening cleaning, but this image was taken in the afternoon, maybe 2 or 3 p.m. So one of the pavilions is probably done with its program and it's being cleaned already. Many of the pavilions felt pretty empty today. This was a round discussion, what is it, 6, 7 people, and that was the whole program for an hour and a half. I went to another meeting room and look again, it's completely or almost empty. There are 6, 7 panelists and maybe 20 people just watching it. So it really feels like COP is coming to its end. Another image from the United Arab Emirates pavilion. It's empty, but it's usually the pavilion is empty anyway because it's so huge that it feels empty all the time. But they have there some really cool text. I walked to the Indonesia pavilion, and they were discussing quite an unusual topic from an unusual perspective. Let me cite, it's the role of faith actors in climate change. And this pavilion was fully crowded. So it is a topic I never really thought about, how the faith actors or faith leaders can play their role in climate change. That was pretty interesting. Now, as COP is coming to its end, there are leftovers of some of the materials and the swag. So people are really packing and putting it together, trying to bring home as much as they can. I quickly went also to have a look to the posters session. I think it's coming to its end. I spent there maybe 20 minutes trying to read some of the posters. And to be honest, there was one person who stopped by the posters for a minute or so. It was completely empty as well. Some of the posters do not fit the boards. I don't really understand why, whether it's because the dimensions that were provided for the posters were incorrect, or there was some sort of a mismatch, but it felt a little awkward. There are either small boards with even smaller posters, or I think this image, the poster was taken away, so there was just left this QR code there. So not much what I have seen in the posters on the posters, but I photographed them all, so we will have their content as well. When it comes to the important politicians, I met only 2 of them today. I knew this face of the lady in green. I just couldn't remember who it was. So it is her name is Annalena Baerbock, and she is the German federal minister for foreign affairs. Germany seems to be playing a big role here as well. Then she went to deliver her speech to the German pavilion, and there was a lot of clapping and a lot of cheering after her speech. Unfortunately, it was all in German. I couldn't hear well, but it was about loss and damage. So maybe this COP is not fully lost and damaged yet, maybe thanks to the Germans. The other important person I met today, it's Franz Timmermans. He is the vice president of the European Commission. He is the main EU leader on the European Green Deal, and he is one of the leading authors of the first European climate law. So he comes to every COP. I have met him a few times, and so he is the, I would say, EU person number 3 of importance. One more note relative to the pavilions. When I walk around them, I see that some of them have these huge LCD screens, and sometimes they are used really well, and sometimes they are used in a poor manner. This is the shot from the Egyptian pavilion, and I was kind of shocked that this session was attended by at least 3 ministers of culture. And look at the image of on the screen. It's all really distorted. It looks ridiculous. I just thought that it was a temporary issue, but when I walked by an hour later, there was just this one screen left. So it was ridiculous that these images are left there so distorted. And I bring this up because then I went to the US pavilion, where the scientist Dr. Laura Lorenzoni was delivering her presentation on a concept called hyperwall. let me explain. It's a system capable of displaying multiple high-definition data visualization simultaneously across an arrangement of screens. So she was basically explaining how this system works. She was talking about different satellites providing different kind of data, the equipment being installed on the ISS, on the International Space Station. And when I compared this screen in the US pavilion with the screen in the Egypt pavilion, the difference couldn't be any bigger. She talked about how they use these advanced technologies to better understand the processes of climate change. She also discussed the topic, if you get garbage data in, you of course get garbage data out. So she was explaining what measures they do to make sure that the data they produce are good. She also discussed the concept of open data and open science. And it was I would say, one of the best presentations I have seen in the whole COP. And as she talked about the open science and open data, this her presentation was available on this website. So I took a detailed photo of that. As soon as it ended, I went to the website and learned quite a bit. I mean, the website is working fine, and there is so much more about the hypervols explained there that it's something definitely worth looking at. And final thought, as I walked along some of the pavilions, I discovered there is also pavilion of Ukraine. I did not really know about it, so walked into it. It is fairly small. There was only few people there delivering their presentation. It was only 4 speakers on the panels. But I took a last image there for today. This would be the last image there. The gentleman was explaining how they just opened a new renewable facility somewhere in Kiev, and then immediately he just added, but 2 days ago we lost the power for 7 million people in Ukraine. So this is the last image of the day, showing, or it should show, some of the realities in Ukraine and how things are there.
Difficult realities indeed. Thank you, Michael. Thank you for this summary of the day. Speaking of which, today was Solutions Day, but we have some material from Dr. John Capece to add to our coverage of Biodiversity Day, the day before. So without further ado, Michael, can we still rely on you again?
Yes, you can. I'm pressing
you.
the share button right now, and here will be the presentation of Dr. Capece. Here we go.
November 16th was Diversity Day at COP27. And some of the coverage of Diversity Day had a clearly human-centric approach to diversity. One pavilion talked about how we needed to diversify our food systems to safeguard the future of food, boost biodiversity, and build resilience in our ecosystems and food systems. So basically biodiversity from a human food systems perspective. Of course, overall biodiversity will enhance human ecosystem support systems. So, there is some legitimacy to this approach, but clearly they are appealing to national self-interest in advocating for biodiversity. Now, today I thought I would focus on some of the data that was used in one of our editorials. 2 editorials ran today in the Florida Weekly, one by our friend Roger Williams, very, very kind editorial on his part relative to KC and myself. But then the second one was written by KC and me, and it included some data about the midterm election and voter preferences and how that relates to climate change, the issue of climate change, how that figured into the decisions of voters in this midterm. But as I was going to the Florida Weekly website, I noticed that the first thing that popped up on my web browser was an ad for the Egypt oil and gas conference coming up in 2023 in February. So kind of ironic, and they're promoting Egypt as a facilitator for the regional oil and gas industry. At least they're not holding it at the same venue as COP27. But the editorial that Casey and I wrote cited from one article talking about the 5 top issues that voters listed as being influencing their vote. None of those had to do with climate. But interestingly, I found another article that pointed out that climate did figure into the voting decision of a significant number of voters, although not in the top 5. Now, when we look at some of these data from the article that originally Casey and I cited in our editorial, it lists the top 5 issues for voters, American voters in the midterm, as being the economy, abortion, gun policy, crime, and immigration. And however, this other article cited that number 6, coming in at 8%, was climate. And that was up 4 points from 2020. So in 2020, only 4% of voters listed climate as driving their personal vote. And why is this important? Well, at events like COP27, among the most important actors in international decision-making on joint climate action are the top 2 economies, the United States and China. So how things go in the US and China plays a very big role in global decisions on the issue. Now, when you look at a different survey that was based upon the asking voters, likely voters, what are the most important issues to the nation at this time, not what influenced their votes, but which they would rank as the top issues of concern in the United States, they listed economy, abortion, and immigration, all 3 of which were in the top 5 of the voters, but climate came in tied with immigration for number 3. When you looked at both the Democrats and Republicans, what they were saying in the aggregate. But when you look at Republicans, their top issues were economy and immigration, and climate came in only way down the list. Only 9% of people in the nation cited it as a top issue, but it was 8th on the list for Republican voters. And I'm not sure if they simply gave them this list of 9 and asked them to rank them, or how that was done. But it did come in at number 8 for the Republicans. Now, for the Democrats, it came in at number 2, and that's quite surprising, tied at number 2 with abortion. So when asked what were the top national issues, climate was right up there with abortion for Democrats, likely voter Democrats. Economy, still for both Democrats and Republicans, at the very top. But when you compare the immigration and climate issues between the Democrats and Republicans, they are mirror images of one another. The Republicans ranked it as the 8th issue, Democrats ranked it as the 2nd highest issue, and exactly the reverse for Republicans versus Democrats. 10% of Democrats listed immigration as an important issue, and 88% of Republicans listed it as an important issue. On the climate issue, 87% of Democrats listed it as a top issue, whereas only 10% of Republicans. So what's interesting about these statistics is at COP27, a large part of the discussion was on immigration, on migration. And they were talking about how migration will be driven by climate change and how it's a critical issue for the stability of society and the national security of many nations. So it's migration is effectively a symptom of climate, not a causal factor. So you almost have the Democrats interested in the causal factor, climate, but not quite as interested in the effect on the migrant/immigration issue, and exactly the opposite among the Republicans. So that's quite an interesting observation, and I thought I'd share that with you tonight.
Wonderful. So today was Solutions Day, and I actually attended a talk. And again, these talks that are part of the topics that the Egyptian presidency selected are difficult to find. Interestingly, they never appeared located in the application that we have. It's just their location says not determined yet, and it's never determined. The information center doesn't know. There have been, when you manage to find one of these talks, sometimes there are changes in time, changes in order, changes in location. But fortunately, I did manage to find one of these talks. And this one was on solutions for climate change and how to conduct our normal activities while decarbonizing. This talk in particular was sorry, so many notes. This talk in particular was led by the Solar Impulse Foundation, and in particular, what they are doing is actually condensing a series of solutions and that they actually stand by as effective and not only in terms of actually cutting emissions, but also effective in economic terms. They actually have published, sorry, wrong image. They actually have published this particular guide of solutions for cities available on their website, and they invited a particular group of representatives from some of the solutions showcased. Some considering energy. This particular company is focusing on Africa, and what they do is provide energy to off-grid households. They already count with 16 small grids in Africa. Then there was also one particular enterprise dedicated to water and water recycling for non-potable use. Again, there is some focus in Africa. It's installed in 7 sites across Uganda and Namibia, and they currently have a manufacturing capacity of 500 units per year. One of the questions that the Solar Impulse Foundation grappled with when condensing these solutions was whether they were applicable in Africa or in the context of non-developed countries, but they actually claim it is, and it would be very interesting to have a deeper look at all the possible solutions. Their main point overall is that solutions exist and they are economically profitable, and that the people in the negotiations don't know essentially that so the people in the negotiations say one thing, but on the negotiations table they stall negotiations essentially because they imagine that given that this in their minds these solutions do not exist or are not available, they will have to renounce many things to actually cut emissions. But their whole point is that these solutions are available and they should reach the negotiation tables. Just to look at the last two panelists, there is one enterprise showcase that actually provides hydropower in remote rural communities without the difficulties of building a huge dam. And again, in particular, what they also remarked is that their solution doesn't involve the displacement of indigenous people, as many huge dams have meant. And the final panelist actually focused on waste management, which was also the topic of another talk of the day. So this particular panelist was from Israel, and they already have one industrial plant for the processing of waste. And their materials are actually in use. The recycled materials are actually in use in Europe and the Americas. So that was one of the talks of the Solutions Day. I think it was a relatively good talk. It gave concrete examples, but again, it would be very interesting to analyze in detail the solutions proposed by the Solar Impulse Foundation. To close the day, I wanted to also show the pictures of another talk. This was let me go to those pictures in particular. Here we are. This was the People's Plenary. The People's Plenary is a space where the People's Declaration is actually revealed for this particular COP. First, we had a collection of images of protests. That were just shared at the beginning before the actual event took place. Pretty powerful images. So the first speaker was the director of the Egyptian Initiative for Human Rights. And essentially one of his main messages was that reconnecting to your culture is also climate action. There were opening ceremonies by indigenous peoples. And then essentially the panel began. The indigenous peoples organizations representative was there, and essentially she remarked that indigenous peoples continue bringing successful solutions, yet they receive no funding, and thus far loss and damage negotiations haven't been successful. And that the real work in the ground is at home, not at COP. The gender representative unveiled the actual People's Declaration, in which demand for funding for the damage was included. Then essentially there was some focus on the historical responsibilities to which the demands for loss and damage correspond to. And after that, we had the youth representative. She also endorsed the People's Declaration. She denounced that children and youth are still living in poverty, and that the inclusion of youth in negotiations that will determine eventually their future is very important. The trade union representative was also present, remarking that governments have to deliver now to keep the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. She endorsed the People's Declaration and essentially said that workers pay a high price, that we need a just transition and a strong loss and damage, and the cancellation of debt to the global south. She remarked finally that labor rights are human rights. After this, we had the environmental NGOs, but we also had the Friends of Disabilities Rights Movement, and essentially the remarks of their representative was that climate change will disproportionately affect people with disabilities in the same way COVID did. The network of NGOs demanding climate justice was also present, and essentially, and actually, I'm sorry, made a mistake. I think this is their particular representative, and essentially they did similar remarks, also adding that slavery, colonialism, imperialism, and neoliberalism has led us to where we are right now. With that, it's 8 p.m. here. It's 1 p.m. in Florida, and with that, we will conclude our transmission of the day. We will see you tomorrow for our last transmission from COP27. Any final thoughts from the panel?
Yeah, I just wanted to say, one of the questions I also asked these random people that I stopped were what they would think of attending a virtual conference. And basically all of them said, wow, that would be great to reduce our carbon footprint, and we think that's a good idea. But at the same time, they said 100% of them said that there is real value in human-to-human interaction on these things, and the networking that is available at these events.
Yes.
And sorry for stepping in again, but since we don't have Rock tonight and monitoring the YouTube stream, I know we are running out of time, but let me just point out we got 3 questions. Question number 1: what was the USAID lady really saying? Let me answer. Listen to it again, and maybe you get that, because with 3 question marks at the end of the questions, it was she says nothing basically, but maybe go figure. Question number 2: are there any high-level negotiation going on today? Let me answer yes. I'm looking at the screen right there, and there are some closing plenaries going on right now, and yes, so the answer is yes. And final question: Pope Francis is in the news encouraging progress at COP27. Do you think religion will play a big role in combating the climate crisis? And I leave that to you. So do you think that religion will play a big role in combating the climate crisis?
That's a very interesting question. Sometimes I think that it could have given that religion entails some degree of influence, but it could have a considerable impact. Yet it hasn't been used to its full potential. it hasn't been applied to its full potential. But I do think that yes, essentially religion carries influence still in our world, and yes, that it could be one main avenue to exert create consciousness about climate change, awareness, and also incentivize a new branch of the movement. Any other thoughts?
Yeah, I think
Well,
religion could be beneficial in fighting the climate crisis, and it definitely has been used to bring people together. But at the same time, I worry about how that might be used in the United States, like how if religious organizations start saying that the climate crisis is something that should be taken seriously and we have to work against like these fossil fuel companies, a lot of those really conservative and all of the MAGA religious folks, I worry about them branching off from those main religious organizations and forming their own little hate groups.
Jeff, you were about to say something?
I was just going to say that, you know, all religions from the beginning of time really have preached anti-consumerism in one fashion or another. The Christian adage about, you know, a rich man entering heaven is like a camel going through the eye of a needle. And so I think that there's a lot of philosophy there that that could be influential if preachers and religious leaders were willing to go back to that message that has basically been ignored by most religions since the beginning of them coming up with the philosophy. Like you see the riches of the Catholic Church and stuff like that. So it would be nice if we would go back to a religion that was based on the original teachings and thoughts of religion.
Pretty interesting question, pretty interesting debate. And we're happily after time, and I think it was worth it. With that, we'll leave you until tomorrow. Please stay tuned, and we'll see you for the final edition of our Campus Climate Corps transmission from COP27 Egypt. Good night, everyone.
Lately, it seems every passing second brings news of another climate-driven disaster. But we still have the power to turn back the clock. Harnessing the power of collective human energy, today's university students are working together to chart a new future, demanding and creating the solutions for a sustainable climate. Our focus in science, engineering, activism, and politics offers the potential of a better tomorrow for all of us. Tune in to Campus Climate Corps for news of what is and what is not happening at this year's UN Climate Conference. Prepare for a livable tomorrow with the life and career of action. Join us and become part of the solution.